The international trade relations have become strained under the Trump administration with its rather protectionist course. Trump has imposed metal import tariffs, which concerns then Canada, Mexico, the EU, Japan, China, Korea, and some other countries. President Trump seems to be very much concerned about the US merchandise trade balance deficit, which I must say is a little bit a narrow perspective. Normally one would consider the trade balance of goods and services and the famous 800 billion US dollar trade deficit of the US is indeed a merchandise trade deficit. So with a broader standard trade balance definition, that looks much better. On the other hand, this raises this old question about the adjustment mechanics and mechanisms for a trade balance deficit. We basically know that trade balance deficit or account-account balance deficit can be corrected by changes in the output growth in the home country and the foreign country, so let's say in the US and in the Eurozone, or it can be corrected by real exchange rate changes. So the United States would need a real depreciation of the US dollar, and the standard condition actually is the famous Marshall-Lerner condition, which says that the sum of the import elasticities in absolute terms at home and abroad must exceed unity. Only then a real depreciation will bring about an improvement of the trade balance. So the US has actually, I would say, two problems disregarding the protectionist trade policy itself. One problem is that the Trump administration has adopted an economic policy which stimulates output growth and therefore also the import of goods and services. So it is reinforcing the trade balance deficit and the current account deficits in the medium term. And I'm afraid that the president's trade policy will become then even more protectionist once he sees that the trade balance deficit and the current account balance deficit will rise in the medium term. On the other hand, the real exchange rate development is also not in a way that would stimulate the adjustment on the trade balance side, because of course in an economy where you have an economic boom, to some extent you see higher capital inflows, and therefore there is an appreciation of the currency, and the rising interest rates of the Fed contribute to this. So it is very interesting then to raise the question, how can we achieve a trade balance adjustment for a country that has a serious trade balance deficit? Let's assume that there is such a problem in the US. And we should do this, of course, with due understanding of reality, or that is, we should take into account we have trade globalization, but we have also foreign direct investment. We have outward foreign direct investment, and we have inward foreign direct investment. And this FDI globalization indeed has to be also considered when we talk about the modified new Marshall-Lerner condition. I have shown in the EIIW working paper 248 with a specific focus on a country with outward foreign direct investment, so there is accumulated outward FDI, that there is a new Marshall-Lerner condition which is stricter than the standard Marshall-Lerner condition. So actually now the paper which is entitled New Marshall-Lerner Conditions for an Economy with Outward and Two-Way FDI, the paper shows that the sum of the two import elasticities in absolute terms must exceed 1 plus 1 over 1 plus lambda divided by alpha times beta star. Alpha is the share of ownership of country 1 investors in country 2, so let's say of US investors in the capital stock in the rest of the world. Beta star is the foreign profit relative to GDP, so the foreign profit ratio, and lambda is a measure for the relative size of the country 1 economy, let's say relative to world GDP. And the point is that this new condition shows it's more difficult actually to achieve a trade balance correction, so a reduction of the deficit through a real depreciation of the currency, because this new condition is stricter. And the higher this lambda and the smaller alpha and beta star, the easier it is for the Marshall-Lerner condition for this FDI world to be fulfilled, or we can say the lower lambda and the larger alpha and beta star are, the more difficult it is to fulfill this elasticity requirement. So if then the share of US ownership in the foreign capital stock is increasing over time, which would be part of a normal globalization process, then it is more difficult to meet this critical new Marshall-Lerner condition, and the same holds if then the profit share in the rest of the world is increasing. So this is quite interesting, and the mechanics is very easy to understand. Imports are not proportionate, as you will find written in most papers or textbooks. It's not proportionate to GDP, but it's rather proportionate to real gross national product. And the real gross national product of a source country of FDI is the sum of real GDP plus the profits from abroad, which would be alpha times beta star times y star, so y star is foreign GDP, times the real exchange rate q star. And a rise of the real exchange rate, of course, then increases the profits calculated in country 1 goods units that you have now, let's say, in the US. And therefore, it's also clear that if the real exchange rate rises, one has now to take into account that imports are now increasing as you have a real depreciation. So therefore, the stricter requirement with this new modified Marshall-Lerner condition. So that could mean that the real exchange rate is not so useful as an adjustment instrument as we used to think. And then it would be all the more important that you have international cooperation, let's say, between the United States and the Eurozone and China and so on, because the adjustment in the trade balance now has to be achieved through changes in the growth rate of the US. The growth rate of the US would have to be reduced, and the growth rate in the Eurozone or in China would have to increase. So I'm absolutely sure that the advisors of President Trump are not aware of this new Marshall-Lerner condition. The new EIIW paper has just been published in July 2018. You can go on our website and you can download it. I have presented the basic idea actually on July 9th and 10th at a workshop at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. And I must say that I also was thinking for a long time about some of the key issues, and I can look back to the meeting of an expert group where I had been invited in 2010, then still under President Trichet at the ECB. And I also remember interesting discussions at the IMF and so on. So I think this new Marshall-Lerner condition is something which is really interesting, and there is a need, of course, to look more than in the empirical aspects related to this new condition. I hope that the transatlantic cooperation can be improved. I think the trade conflict is very costly for the US and the world economy, and this is certainly also not a way to reduce the US trade balance deficit. The way the policy approach from Washington is not good for the United States itself, and the US is a leader of the Western world, so that also means there's a certain responsibility. So, thank you.